Um, okay, so I've asked to chat with you today because you run the organization Alive Community Outreach, who is now partnering with Allen County officials on this program that's kicking off this fall, designed to address handgun violence among local youths, as I understand it. And I'm hoping you can start by explaining to me a little bit about the work of Live Community Outreach. I know you guys are very active in local schools, but in my understanding, just from checking out your website and some of the stuff you guys have on there, you guys are about supporting people after following homicides, helping young people get better with managing conflict, and then it also seems like you're kind of working culturally to um, you know, I guess overall avoid behavior that results in these bad outcomes. Is that a fair description of your work?
Yeah, did your homework, man. Definitely. Yeah, that's a pretty good assessment. Do you know about much about like the history or why we got started and kind of all that? Or
I was going to ask you about that next. I know you have
yeah,
some deeply personal motivations behind this.
yeah,
I heard you talk, saw some video with you talking a little bit about the loss of your cousin. I think his name was Nick. Is that right?
yeah, yeah.
And I mean, for folks who are not familiar with that, and could you tell me a little about that? You lost him to a shooting.
Yeah, that was back in 2016, and so this is the 10-year anniversary in September
Mm.
this year. But yeah, that was the catalyst for us getting into this work for moving back to Fort Wayne. We're from here, but we're down in Atlanta for about 8 years, and um, yeah, when that happened, we just felt this calling to come back home, and we came back that following summer and didn't really have a plan. We just spent a few years learning, trying to understand, who's doing what to address this issue of community violence. 2016 was to this day, that was the record-breaking year for homicides in Fort Wayne, and we were already paying attention before my own family was affected by it. But just trying to understand, okay, what's going on, who's doing what to address this, and then trying to identify the gaps in the midst of that and where we might fit in. And so the survivor support, which is what we're still very committed to. We have a full-time director who's um, that's her role to support families. But that was kind of our motivation. It affected my family, but then we got to know dozens of families that first few years and trying to understand their needs. And so we got that work off the ground early on, but then the work in the schools was a response to the question, what can we do to move the needle? What can we do that would lead to less families needing support in the first place?
Mm.
And that sent our small team that we had early on a journey that led us to this nonviolence work in the schools. And there's a whole lot more I can say if you're interested in that. But um, that work started in 2021 at Southside High School with the Peacemaker Academy, which is a 3-week leadership development program in the summer where we go through Martin Luther King's philosophy of nonviolence, principles of nonviolence, steps for organizing a peaceful campaign. We look a lot at internal violence, at trauma, how trauma um, affects the brain, how it affects the body, how it can um, lead us into this cycle of violence, whether it's um, self-harm or harming others if we don't address that. But we also we don't just look at it, at the individual level, but also at the societal level, and the conditions that lead to violence. at higher levels. And so we go really deep with students, but then at the end of the 3 weeks, they don't just get a certificate and move on. But now we say, okay, now that we've equipped you with this framework, we're going to walk with you throughout the course of the year to implement a plan that to build peace that you all developed together as a group of students. And so 2021, that was our first year, but it just took off. Students were um, hold on, let me put this on Do Not Disturb so we don't keep getting that. Um, they were highly motivated to change the narrative about their school, about their community. Many of these students had lost people to violence. Many of these students have been affected by other forms of violence, by domestic violence. Um, Sexual violence is one that's come up a lot over the years, and so um, it just took off. And within a couple years, we started seeing the effects of that in terms of data in the school, with fights being the biggest kind of data point early on, and the school system, the superintendent, they were in the midst of developing this comprehensive safety plan for the district, and they invited us to be a part of that. And so we expanded in 2023 to all five Fort Wayne Community Schools high schools. And so now we have a full-time peace advocate in each one of those schools. Every summer, instead of just 12, a cohort of 12 students from Southside High School, it's 12 students from each school. So we have 60 total students in each cohort every year. And we got all kinds of stuff going on in the school buildings on a day-to-day uh, basis. But and now we're starting to see that same trend in the other schools that we saw at Southside with just the culture change. And we don't, I mean, fights is important, but our goal is not ultimately just to reduce fights or to reduce violence or to reduce handgun, um, incidents, but we think that because and this is kind of a philosophical thing. If we look at violence as a problem to be solved, um, we think that's backwards. We think violence is a symptom of deeper issues, and if we get at those deeper issues with young people, then a reduction of violence will be the result of that. And so that's what our hope is in the work that we do in the schools, and that is certainly what our hope would be in the work that we're doing with or getting into with ACJC as well.
Very interesting what you were talking about there, because I think, when you see criticism come across, in public policy programs like this, people say, well, they're treating the symptom, not the cause,
Mm.
and so, do we really ever get anywhere? And, when you were talking about, even in the initial phases with, again, sort of the victim support, that kind of rang a bell in my mind because I grew up in a gang neighborhood, violent neighborhood, and it seemed like so much of the violence that happened was revenge for some other violence, and then revenge for that, and then and so on and so forth, and it just sort of kept going because people just had rage and bad feelings following
Where are you
whatever had
from?
happened to them.
You from here?
I grew up in Chicago, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
Chicago. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, well, maybe I should even ask, I mean, what did it look like for you on your end? I mean, how did you deal with your trauma that you experienced with your cousin to sort of, obviously you've channeled the emotions of that into positive work now, but you were a grown person by then when
Yeah.
that happened to you. Different for our younger people to process it, I'm sure.
Yeah, for me, and everybody deals with things differently, and I think everybody's timeline is different. We talk a lot about transforming pain into purpose, but that's not an immediate kind of response for everybody, nor should it be. I think for me, um, I I did that pretty quickly. I mean, I think I came home and I officiated his funeral. So I'm a United Methodist clergy person, and it was a last minute thing that I ended up doing that. And I mean, I just as I was doing that, looking at his lifeless body in the casket, my thought was, and my message was, even in that eulogy, was like, we can't let his death be in vain. Like, and so I was like motivated immediately. Um, and so I turned that into action, and okay, so that's where I channeled it. But kind of the emotional piece, and I don't know that I processed that actually as in as healthy a ways as I should have, and really take time to kind of reflect on that. Um, and it's hit me in really strange ways and unexpected ways. Like, I'm not a crier. Like, I just don't cry really. That's not how I kind of process my emotion generally. But like a couple years ago, I was teaching in our academy, talking about my story with my cousin, which I've probably shared 1,000 different times in large assemblies and small groups, and in a bunch of different ways. And like, in that moment, like, I just started kind of losing my train of thought, and I just kind of started feeling my body just kind of go numb a little bit. And like,
Mm.
I'm like, I gotta sit down, man. Like, in the middle of teaching, like a gym full of kids. And like, I sat down, and then like it just came out like right there. And that was like, that's the only time that's ever happened, but it was out of nowhere and just completely unexpected. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think I've tried my best. And even after that, I'm like, okay, I need to, like, talk about this at a different level than I'm normally talking about it. And I've done that, and I've had, lots of people to help me process through that. But no matter how much you process through it, or how much support you have, like, it does uh hit you and affect you in unexpected ways at unexpected times. Um, and this is my cousin. This is somebody that I was close to growing up. But I've come to appreciate and understand that there are kind of levels of relationships in grief. Like, if, like, my cousin was my cousin, I hadn't seen him a lot, like over a decade, because I
Mm.
was in Atlanta and he was here and had different things going on. He was locked up for a lot of that time, so even when I would come home, I wouldn't see him. And but like, somebody loses a child, that's a different thing. Or a child loses a parent or a sibling that's in that house with them or shares a room with them. It's just, they're different. They're different layers to this, and levels of grief and trauma, that I've come to appreciate.
When we talk about this program that's kicking off this fall, this brings you into interactions with young folks that at least the justice system looks at like, hey, we need to do some sort of intervention here so that this young person doesn't end up being the guy or girl
Mhm.
who takes a life in the way that you lost your cousin. Um, how has losing your cousin impacted the way you would sit across from a young person who, you know, the justice system looks at, being worried about being on that path?
So I think, from a couple different angles, I think helping them understand, like, just the ripple effects of that, because I think that sometimes, when young people, when they are engaged in this sort of activity, often aren't thinking all these things through,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So like, or they're just thinking about the person that wronged them, or that they have beef with, or whatever. But that person has family that has nothing to do with it. There have been several incidents here in just the past year. I mean, this year, where people fired into homes and things like that, and a couple kids got hit earlier this summer, and young kids, like 5 and 3 years old or something like that. I
Wow.
forget the
Yeah.
exact ages, but um, they got nothing to do with whatever beef that you have. So I think kind of like telling this not just my story, but like telling like Nick's kids story. I've gotten close to his kids, and his oldest was 7 years old at the time.
Wow.
And so there's that part of it, just trying to help them to see kind of the different elements of it. But also like understanding that and we'll get into the in the second session that we're doing, we're going to get a little bit into the philosophy of nonviolence, um, and the first principle of nonviolence um, that Dr. King talks about is to attack forces of evil, not persons who are doing evil.
Mm.
And so I tell my story kind of through the lens of that principle. And what um how can if you're upset with somebody, if you have beef with somebody enough to where you would shoot at them, what's really going on? Like what are you really upset about? Like what's the beat what's the foundation of that beef, and like how can we address that and attack that? Um, and really that principle that King taught, I mean, there was like this spiritual dimension of it too, like, everyone's created in the image of God, and like we should respect, like I don't expect these young people to for that to resonate at this stage,
Mm.
but there's also a strategic element of that principle that violence begets violence. And if you attack the person, um, that that it's not going to end there, right?
Right.
So, like, you're putting the people, who do you love most? Your mother, your sister, or whatever. Like, how do you understand that what you're doing is putting them at risk?
Mm.
Even if you don't have respect for your own life, if you
Mm.
don't have respect for your own safety or whatever, you're putting the people around you at risk.
Hmm.
Is there anybody that needs you? That
Mm.
that would be hurt, that would be devastated if you were gone, whether gone 6 feet in the ground or gone lost to the criminal justice system, because you got caught, and you will get caught more than likely. Right now in Fort Wayne, there's like upwards of 80 some percent clearance rate.
Mm.
Um, so this is not, people aren't getting away with this. And if you get away with it once, like this is a way of life that you're living that ends in one of two places. So, I mean, there's lots of different kind of pieces to that, but I think trying to connect with them at that level of like, why are you carrying guns to begin with? Why do you feel the need to do that? And like, let's get under that and have that deeper conversation. Um,
Well, that's an interesting point because I that is a question I specifically asked, probation and the judge kind of overseeing all this and to get their perspective on it. And they've said very similar things that, youth carrying guns either for protection or just, and maybe this gets to the cultural change you guys are looking for, the idea that like it's kind of cool, like makes me a tough person or whatever. And
yeah.
it's like almost fashionable to carry a handgun. I mean, does that match what you hear folks saying?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it like even on the image with a lot of students are portraying online, and or young people, like just this image, and you got the we get into social media too, and like people have like their authentic self and their digital self, and
Mm.
like this digital self that they're portraying online, with money, and some kids are, um have guns, that they're, in their is part of that image. And yeah, I mean, there is a sense in which like some may genuinely feel unsafe and feel
Mhm.
like they need to carry a gun. But that raise um, begs the question, well, why do you feel unsafe? Because
Right.
there are plenty of kids walking around this city that don't feel unsafe. So there also has to be an element of what are you doing to contribute to feeling unsafe?
Mhm.
Um, but then I do think that there's some that just are doing it because it's fashionable, because they think it's cool. And another thing too is I think that this is a real element, right? When I was in high school, someone whoops my ass in on the outside or at the playground when I'm a kid, like I get a black eye, I get my butt whooped, and that I live to
Right.
see another day the next day, right? But like um now that might go viral, might end
Right.
up all over the
Yeah.
place with everybody's, and so
Yeah.
there's that part of
You're
it.
on World Star, right? Yeah.
So it's like, I think that there is that very real kind of dimension too, where like they would just rather pull out a weapon than throw hands and get it over with, because it's riskier now in 2026 than it was back when we were coming up.
Right.
So,
Interested in maybe some of the unique challenges that this prevention program poses for you. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is the youth that you work with in the schools, they're kind of coming to you voluntarily, or at least maybe it's been suggested to them to be part of it. Is that right?
um, yes, yes, for the most part. I mean, we do get involved in like mediations that
Sure.
are in the school where it's not like kids that are in our program, but like there's a big thing that's popped off and it needs to be mediated, and we're pulled into that. And so we do get involved in a lot of that we may not have like deeper relationships with on the front end. But like Peacemaker Academy, like students apply for that or recommended
Gotcha.
for that. We have after school peace club that's all voluntary. So yeah.
So does it pose like, I mean, it seems like it would pose an additional challenge. These youths who are going to come to you through this program, they're being told by the judge, you can do this, or, you can be locked up.
Mhm.
Right? So, you're going to be dealing with youth who don't want to be there, I guess for the most part, or at least they're taking the more desirable of two bad options, for them. How do you work with folks who, are not happy to see you?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think we're going to learn a lot uh, this first round, because we're doing this several rounds back to back to back, um and we're just doing 2 sessions of 8 as well. So
Hmm.
so it's going to be a little bit different, where we're not going to be like building really deep relationships with the students. Because like
Hmm.
even in our Peacemaker Academy, which is 3 weeks long, and like those are our core students, it takes a few days to kind of build that relationship and that trust with those students. So this is
Sure.
going to be different, no doubt. And I think we'll have to assess and be nimble, to kind of figure out how to optimize that time that we do have with these young people. But I have a little bit of experience with this. I worked for a while at the Center for Nonviolence, doing some men's batters intervention work, and um, we had, I don't know, 20, 25 men in every group, and there were men in that group that didn't want to be there. But there were some who really did, and then there were some that like would rather be someplace else, but they were like, as long as I'm here, I'm gonna engage and make the most of it. So I'm expecting there'll be some sort of blend, but I think the way that we approach things, and just being authentic, being vulnerable ourselves, rather than like, hey, we're the adults here and we're here to teach you. Um, so, shut up and listen to our great wisdom.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's not our approach at all. Our approach is, we're in this together, man. Like you guys are sitting in the seat that you're sitting in, but like um, we all at some level want more peace in our lives. We've been affected by violence. We have some other people on our team that are going to be a part of this who have lived experience. One gentleman, he he went through ACJC at one time, as a young person, and now he's one of our peace advocates. And so, like, I think just being vulnerable and being willing to just be authentic and let them know that like we don't have some big agenda other than we want the best for you, we want the best for our community. Um, and then also be able to invite them into the things that we're doing in the schools and hopefully continue those relationships because these students are in probation, they're not in lockup, so
Right.
there's going to be some overlap of students that are there and that we also will have interaction with in the schools. And so that to me is like the dream for this is, man, what if we are able to meet some kids in this setting and then they end up becoming peacemakers
Hmm.
in the school like that would be very cool for me. But I think that the approach is everything. These Building Kings guys that are there, um, their approach, we've sat in on one of the older Safer Street sessions where we were just kind of flies on the wall and the Building Kings guys were leading it. They have a very relational approach. A lot of those guys have lived experience. I've been where those kids are. And so, I think there'll be a lot of kids that week one, week two kind of come in with that hard shell, but a lot of them that those walls will come breaking down just because of the approach that we're taking, that the Building Kings guys are taking, and that probation is taking too. Like, I this isn't something that I would have just jumped into if I didn't really feel good about like the people that are over probation right now.
Hmm.
Because I mean, sometimes I think in institutions like, criminal justice, there'd be this very punitive approach, like scared straight approach,
Right.
and man, there's some really good people that are really trying to think outside the box here, and those early meetings that we had with them was enough for me to say, okay, this is something that I'd love to be a part of, because what they're doing, even without us, is really good stuff, and I think kind of moving
Yeah.
our community in a really good direction.
That whole scared you mentioned the whole scared straight thing. I mean, that is something specifically that, when I was talking with probation and the judge and that, kind of they pointed to as, look, it didn't work.
Yeah.
The scare tactics, showing them gory photos or having somebody come in and yell at them. Um, it didn't really move the needle like may
Yeah.
have thought it would compared to, maybe somebody saying I can relate to where you're at, so that seems to be what is being tried here.
And I think there's a way even to communicate consequences in a way that's tapping into a different emotion other than like just fear, trying to scare them, like um my our director of survivor support, she'll be a part of this at some level, but she often will share her story with young people, and she's got one son who's dead. He was murdered back in 2018, and then another son who's doing 80 years. And so she talks about her story as a mother and that experience. And I mean, it communicates the consequences of like those two paths, those two roads, um, where this life leads to, in a different way than just trying to yell at him and scare him and tap into fear, um, but the emotions of a mother dealing with this
Mhm.
and the children that are involved in this and how things are for them. And so I still think that's an important part, but just framing it in a different way, more effective way.
Definitely. You've kind of alluded, you've touched on this several different ways, but local TV did a segment maybe a few weeks back about this program kicking off, and when I was reading the comments online and reacting to the segment, so many of them were like, "Well, where are the parents?"
Yeah.
And so I guess I would ask you, I mean, what role do parents play in all this, in trying to um, turn the situation in a different direction?
A critical role. And, I think that is a challenge. That is a challenge because you can have the best program in the world, um, all the right people and the right, great curriculum and all of that. But if the parents aren't bought in or the guardians aren't bought in, and young people are going back into an environment that's toxic, back into an environment that is part of that culture that glorifies violence and um, or parents that aren't healed themselves. That's another thing too. Like if we're working with young people, maybe there's a young person that's just got all this anger and bitterness and hatred, that um, came from maybe a sibling getting murdered, right? And it's still just kind of storing all that up. Well, maybe mom hasn't healed from that.
Hmm.
Maybe mom just like, had this happen and she had the funeral and then is, has other kids and other responsibilities and is right back at, just trying to survive, but hasn't had the support that she's needed to heal. Um, I mean, there's lots of different pieces to this, but um, I think that's a bigger conversation that we need to have as a community is, um, how can we do things at that level, at the family level, and with safer streets, I know with the last one that there were parents that were involved. The parents brought the kids
Right.
and were
Yeah.
a part of that process, and um, I think that was really really good when I sat in on some of those sessions and hearing some of the conversations that were happening between parents and young people. And there was some, and this just happened within the span of one session where I saw like this hardness from so many of the kids, but then by the end of it, like they were crying with their parent, that was there because their parent was able to communicate with them how it makes them feel. But these are all parents that they want their kids to turn it around and they're supportive, but there are parents in our community who are not involved like that,
Right.
and you have kids that are running the streets and their parents are nowhere to be found. Like that is, so what do you do with that?
Yeah.
I wish I had an easy answer for that, or knew, how to approach that side of things, but it is definitely a challenge. It is definitely a challenge.
So obviously, this effort it's being grant funded. Looking at doing this over, a specific time period. But as I talked to everybody involved so far, obviously everybody's hoping this is going to be a huge success that then leads to some sort of form of ongoing funding, whether that be grants or, moving budget line items. For you, what would success look like? What would cause you to look back and say, okay, this we moved the needle here in the right direction.
I think the biggest indicator for me would be what I mentioned, just a little bit ago. Like if we meet kids in this room, in this space, and then they end up becoming peacemakers. Um, and I know that's not going to be the case with every young person, but if we are able to have some students go through that process and then become peacemakers, because peacemakers are students that are deeply committed to being a part of the solution. Um, and to me, there's um, no one can have a bigger impact on any form of violence than those who've been affected by that form of violence, or been affected deeply by violence in general. And so like to me, that would be the biggest thing. Of course, um, I think the ACJC, what they're going to be looking at is recidivism and
Okay.
rates, and of course, like that, we're with them on that. Um, but I would like to go to that next level because recidivism, and we make a distinction in the curriculum that we teach, nonviolence, with a dash mark and then or with a hyphen and then nonviolence all one word. Nonviolence without a hyphen is just kind of the negation of violence, like avoiding violence. Whereas nonviolence, all one word, is actively building peace. So the recidivism thing to me is about nonviolence without a hyphen. That's like the bare that is kind of the baseline. That's what you want, um, as a baseline. But then how do you move beyond that and develop leaders with
Mm.
this group so that young people who were once carrying weapons or firing their weapons even, um, are now on the front line of building peace in their school and in their community. That's that's my dream, and I think what our motivation is, behind this, to really kind of take this to the next level.
Um, Maybe just take a minute or two here and sell that idea of becoming a peacemaker. Like what, explain to people who may be interested in this, what do your peacemakers do?
Well, the initial process, is that they go through this 3 week academy. But even before that, they apply, they interview, um, they we have to have recommendations. It's a really intense process, and there are only 12 spots per school, so it's not easy, um, for them to get accepted into that part. Now we have lots of other things that we do where it's the numbers are a lot bigger, but for that we keep it small and intimate, intentionally. Um, I think Southside had like 50 applicants, 40 or
Wow.
50 applicants for 12 spots. Um, and we're seeing more applicants at the other schools as well. So, um, we want students who are leaders, who, and every once in a while we'll take a chance on a student who may not be all the way there in terms of leading positively, but just needs that bar kind of set for them. And but we do this in conjunction with school admin and guidance counselors and all of that. So once we have our cohort, they go through this 3 week journey where we take a deep dive, looking at internal violence, looking at systemic violence, looking at issues of violence in our school, that in our community, that the students want to address. We talk a lot about how we've been affected by violence, um, and then learning about the Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence, the principles, the steps, de-escalation, kind of all of this, and then it culminates with them building a plan as a cohort, to build peace, in their school. Some of what they've done has been beyond the school, but mainly focused on the school. And then over the course of the year, they have a commitment, to put in a certain number of hours, to work together on building that, moving, forward with that plan together, as a cohort. Um, and so they, I mean, they are put in positions of leadership in the school. The school sees them as leaders. The administration sees them as leaders. The district sees them as leaders. They've taught, um, professional learning, sessions to all staff in the school. Each school does it a little bit differently, but, like the freshmen, past couple of years, the peacemakers they've done presentations to the entire freshman class,
Hmm.
each school, so that the freshmen coming in, are introduced to kind of the language of nonviolence, and, um, kind of what the goals are. Every school has a peace count that we're actively tracking, and, but so there's a lot of different things involved with it, but it's all kind of working toward that goal of building peace
Hmm.
in the school, or what Dr. King called, beloved community. How do we got all this rich diversity in the schools? How do we celebrate that? How do we highlight different cultures and this past academy, a new initiative, and this is all student led. We had students from like 10 different nations represented just in our cohort of 60 students.
Yeah.
And so they're starting an international peacemakers group, and part of that is about raising awareness about violence in different parts of the world.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, and so yeah, I mean every year it's like it's evolved in different ways, and it's gone in whatever direction the students take it. And that's the beauty of it to me. It's not just like the adults have this program that kids are a part of, but it's like, you know, we have this framework that we're equipping students with, and then we're saying, what do you want to do with this? And then our job from there is to support them in the movement that the next phase of the movement that they're trying to build. So it's really putting them in a position of power. A lot of young people aren't used to having. Um, we're equipping them and empowering them and then getting out the way. People ask me all the time, where do you see this movement going in 5 or 10 years? And I'm like, it's going to go wherever they take us, because it's ceased being our vision 5 years ago. Um, I can keep going, but
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. No,
that
appreciate
that that, that it's a movement that they are leading. And um Southside, that first group of Southside students, they said, we want to change the narrative. And we said, well, let's help you change the narrative. And now that group of students who said, we're tired of people calling our community ghetto, our school ghetto, um, that school became the model for the whole district. And now we have other districts that even have reached out to us saying, hey, what's this thing that you all are doing? We'd like to do some of that at our school or in our district.
it.
And so it's just there have been these ripple effects that have been really cool to see. So it's not a program, it's a movement.
Yeah.
It's a living, breathing movement. And for students who are ready to be the peace, as our campaign that we launched a couple of years ago, if you're ready for that, then let's go. Come on. You're not the future. We tell kids they're the future. That doesn't mean anything to young people who, I mean, they're the
Right.
they're the leaders right now. So let's go. Let's go.
Mhm.
Let's go. We need you to be part of this movement, to help lead this movement.
Sometimes I take clips of my video chats with people to then sort of pull people into the eventual article that I write.
Yeah.
If I do that for this, and say there's a young person out there who is carrying a gun now, haven't used it, carrying it for whatever reason that that person has decided to carry it, what would be your message to that young person?
That's tough. That's tough. Um, I don't have any message for that young person because I don't know him, you
Mhm.
know. I think that, like, our community, any community is there's no shortage of adults like giving messages to kids. And those messages really just become for us adults to pat each other on the back and like cheer, like, yeah, that's a good word. These kids don't care what we have to say. They don't care. Um, what's the cliche saying? Kids don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care, or something like that.
Right, right.
Like like you gotta build a relationship and get to know the kids first. Like that's step number one. In that, because if I just have a generic message for kids who are carrying weapons, then that shows a lot of, I think, kind of, it speaks to my naivete and um, ignorance, and like, to me, it's a case by case situation. Yeah, like the general message is kids shouldn't be carrying guns. Like we can all get behind that message, but um, unless we know the story and we know where each young person is coming from, what they've been through, the why, then we don't need to be having a general message for kids without being able to roll our sleeves up and get to know them and build that relationship. Um, so I don't know how helpful that is for what you're looking for, but I just
Well, no,
think
I
that,
mean, I think it speaks to what you're doing programmatically,
yeah,
overall. It's not just here's a slogan, let me bury that in your brain and send you on your
yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I think we've touched on all the areas I was thinking about coming into the conversation, but what didn't I ask you about, or what do you want to say that we haven't covered?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you're getting into in this story, or even if you with talking with ACJC about like guns in general, you know.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know if that's part of the conversation or not, but
It is, I mean, one of the questions I asked both the judge and probation was, where are these guns coming from? How are they getting their hands on their guns? And I mean, one of the things that they were talking about is, you know, uh, several things. One, unsecured guns. Gun owners just, not being responsible with their weapons and having them somewhere that, a young person can obtain it. Or again, it being within kind of the culture, either the family culture, there's guns in the house and it's just kind of nonchalant and we all carry or whatever, or within their friend group or whatever. And so, they just get guns given to them or passed to them. And then it just, becomes part of the wardrobe, or whatever. Um, and I mean, so those are the conversations that I've had because I think it is one of the things people think about whenever we write an article about youth gun violence. It's where are the parents, and then two, it's how are the why did how do these kids even have guns? Don't we have laws against that? That sort of thing. So yeah.
yeah, well, and I think what I see a lot, like in any comments about in the comment sections about stories related to gun violence, is that like it's not a gun problem, it's a people problem, and guns don't kill people, people kill people, and like there's this dichotomy.
Hmm.
um and I don't know how we break through that, because everything is so like politically polarized,
Right.
and like you're either this or you're that, and you're either pro-gun or you're anti-gun, or you're pro-life or you're pro-cho, or you're like it's either one or the other, and there's rarely room in like public discourse for nuance and saying like, okay, yeah, what does it mean to be like pro Second Amendment, and like, you know, not anti-gun, but also saying, you know what, like we do have to have some conversations about that as well, because it's both, right? I mean, like I think what we're trying to do is on the people side of things and
Hmm.
addressing what's going on with young people, um, that makes them feel like they need to carry weapons in the first place. And let's get down, like that's what we're interested in, and that to me is the deeper work. Um, but there's this unprecedented access to guns, and I know there are all kinds of legislative ideas on the table, or that have been proposed, and I don't know how we uh I, I don't know that there is an easy answer to that side of things, but I think that we at least need to have that conversation without it being perceived as this threat to, all of our, right to bear arms. And that becomes a really frustrating thing for me. I don't think that's the like what you're talking about in this article, but that's just kind of an aside. I think that it's both. I mean, we have a problem with with mental health and kind of unaddressed trauma and all of these things, but these aren't necessarily new issues that we've had.
Right.
On the people side of things, but I think that this unprecedented access to deadly weapons that we have, that our young people have, and yeah, where are they coming from? Why are they unsecured? Maybe that needs to be a campaign, for
Mhm.
households that have guns. How do we, not have, allow them to be easily accessible to young people.
Mhm.
Maybe there should be consequences for people that don't keep their weapon locked up, and their kid ends up getting it and committing a crime with it, or whatever. Um,
I had asked
so
a judge a question along those lines, when he was kind of talking about this. I said, is to your knowledge, is there any part in the, legal gun ownership process where the dots are connected here? That,
yeah,
if you're not a responsible firearms owner that secures your weapons, are they made aware that those are the weapons that so often end up in the hands of, or are so often involved in youth violent crime? And, his answer is essentially not that he's aware of, you
yeah.
know. Yeah.
So I think those are important discussions, but I think that, like, you know the I think that it, legislation alone is not going to solve this problem. Of gun violence, because every time there's a incident of gun violence, kind of that's the argument that I hear. Kind of on the other side is like, we need legislate, we need to take action now, and like,
Hmm.
well, if what action can we take that would solve the gun violence crisis tomorrow? And like,
Right, right.
I mean, this is a long game here, I think, of looking at, okay, what can we do at that level, but then, like, what can we do to really come alongside um, young people, and young men especially, because that's who we're losing at astonishing rates.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's both of these, I think, that we need to hold in tension.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much for spending so much time with me today. I really appreciate it, and I'll definitely give you a heads up when I have more information about when the article actually comes out.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a great day, okay?
All right, you too.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.